Right, okay, yeah, so that's I think the current meta for 07.5. That's basically what I think will happen. And then now we're going to talk a little bit about O8, which is when the bans actually take place for most of the West that are not going to nationals. So O8 wise, I think a few key things. The O8 leaders are all pretty good. Kalgara, Carrot, Marco, Pudding. I guess King as well is not the greatest, but he might be able to come back because Apilo is banned. So I'm going to put all of them onto the tier list first, and then we'll move them up accordingly. Of course, I'm playing Red Blue Marco now, so I may be a little bit biased, but let's talk about it. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, the tier list for 08 pre-ban is very simple. The tier list for 08 pre-ban is these two, is these three in this order. Alright. Lucci has a reasonable matchup into Law, and Law beats everything. That's basically the 08 the meta right now. Moria has fallen off the face of the earth. There's no value in playing Moria over Lucci. Other than that, this is basically the meta. You can play, I want to say, let me think. Okay. This is the 08 meta pre-ban. These 6 decks are playable and everything else is garbage. So you can play RP Law, Lucci, or BY Luffy. Or you can play NL, Kalgara, or Zoro. And you can play nothing else. That is 06. I suppose you can also play Nami. Because Nami does well into most of these except for the RP Law. But again, yeah, these are the 6 playable decks in 08. Now that we've banned Red Purple Law, a lot of decks actually come back to life. So firstly, Bonnie is suddenly given a new lease on life. Reiju, of course, like I mentioned for 07, Katakuri. Other than that, I think Nami and Pudding. So these are decks that auto lost to Red Purple Law, so they were immediately just taken out of the meta entirely. Alright, same thing. Now that Lucci has lost stage, Dofi as well as Boa are a little bit better. But Luffy still has access to Jack now, which still makes them both not that great. The moment the Lucci drops a Jack, you are definitely in a losing position. So I'm going to talk about 08 first and then 08.5. So with this being said, right, I think with the bans now in place, I really think Pudding is going to be a top tier deck. Now, the reason for Pudding being top tier is that its primary losing matchup was Red Purple Law because of how fast it was. Now that that is gone, I think Pudding is going to be a very, very good deck. The main reason is it's really, really fast. It's really good at getting to its 10 Dawn, 9 Dawn turn early, and then that is enough pressure such that Lucci, any removal deck like Lucci, even BY Luffy will have a problem dealing with all of the big bodies. So here's an example, right? By your 10 Dawn turn for BY Luffy, normally this is the first turn that you transform, or is the turn right before you transform. At this point, Pudding should have a 9k and a 12k body on board. And if you are at anything less than 3 life, that's going to take at least 2 hits out of you. And again, remember, the 10 cost mom can choose not to take your life. So Pudding can heal, play a 10-12 body, and then after that, just leave you at 4 life still until she's ready to start smacking into you. So I think Pudding is really, really good. The matchup spread-wise, I think at the moment, after the bans, the only negative matchup is probably Bonnie, because of Tenko's Dofi. And other than that, I think the other negative matchup is probably Zoro and maybe Reiju. I'm not sure because I haven't tested this matchup specifically, but I think Pudding is going to be much, much better post-ban. Now, that being said, because of what I said earlier about how its only bad matchup is Zoro, I think Zoro is going to be a pretty good pick for S tier as well in OP08. Now, for one, it is just a very, very consistent deck. I think it's very fast, it's good, it's strong. If you've seen my latest video on the animal version of Zoro, I think it's really, really good as well. It has a very clear game plan, you have very good lines, you have even access to pretty decent top end, and of course, the very, very simple idea of Diablo Jambe go 14k face is also a very, very good threat to place onto your opponent. So for me, I think because it checks Pudding, because it's really, really good into Pudding, it should be up here in the S tier as well. And I think last but not least, for something that beats Zoro very consistently, I think of course NL is the obvious answer here that checks the Zoro, but even then that matchup is not, say, very, very good. I want to say that the third top deck here is probably still going to be BY Luffy. Now, BY Luffy is really, really consistent. It didn't receive any nerfs, it didn't receive any bans. The main nerf that it got is that Lucci, which used to be the best, one of the best decks, and one of his best matchups, is now no longer going to be best deck in format. So suddenly decks like Bonnie, which were previously gate-kept by Lucci, are able to play a little bit more. So he does get a little bit of a nerf there. But I think he has a pretty decent matchup into Zoro. The Zoro does have ways to beat BY Luffy, but I think the BY Luffy game plan is definitely still more consistent. I think his matchup spread is pretty good still. He does still beat Lucci. I think he does still beat Reiju. I think he does still beat that Zoro. So for me, I think these three are probably the best three decks going into OP08. And for me personally, I think Pudding is probably going to be the best of these three. Now, the reason why I'm putting Reiju down from S is I think Reiju doesn't do super well into Pudding unless you open with the Ichiji pair early game. I think Reiju doesn't do super well into Pudding unless you open with Ichiji pair. And even then, I think Pudding has enough such that she can stall the game and heal, such that you will just be overwhelmed by big bodies. I think, again, Reiju's one big weakness. Hey, thank you for the raid, Boy Wonder. Z-Boy, thank you so much for the raid. I really appreciate it. What were you doing? I hope you had a good stream. Anyway, hello new friendos, hello new randos. I am Hiro Shisho. Very nice to meet you. We're just talking about the One Piece card game. Specifically, we're talking about the tier list for 07, 08, and 08.5. Sorry, 07.5, 08, and 08.5. You're playing Moria? Okay, sick. I might play a little bit of Moria later as well. Good to know that. You may be happy to know that I think he's probably like 4th or 5th best deck in 07.5 as well. But I think remains to be seen for 08. Where was I? Yeah, so if I was to choose one of the best decks for 08 moving forward in the post-ban environment, it's probably going to be Pudding. I think just the amount of ramp as well as the consistency of the deck and the very easy game plan makes it a very, very good deck. On top of that, I think, again, the matchup spread is pretty even, and it's favored into quite a few of the popular decks, particularly BY, I think is favored for Pudding, Bonnie, I think is favored, NL is definitely favored. I think the main things that you should be worried about, Lucci is also favored. So I think the main things you should be worried about are probably Katakuri because of that 7k base swing, Reiju if they high roll you, as well as Kalgara I think might be a bit scary. But other than that, I think you should be totally fine into most of the 08 meta. Other than that, I think with the stage being banned, I think both Dofi and Boa can also go back up to A tier, as well as the Red Blue Mako. For me, I think pre-ban, the main bad matchup for Red Blue Mako was actually still Lucci, because there was no 5-cost Ace, there's also no 7-cost Newgate. I think it's not the greatest in terms of those two matchups. I mean, I'm playing Mako now. I think in 08.5 he's probably one of the top decks. I would say he's probably top 5. I'm not sure who's the number 1 deck at the moment, but we'll talk about this in a little bit as well. I think Mako is really, really good. With the new meta as well, I think he has a pretty decent chance into beating Pudding by walling up, playing blocker Mako and such. The main reason I'm putting him here at A is because Zoro is an auto-lose matchup for Mako. Zoro is just an auto-lose matchup, so I'm not going to put him up there. I think Zoro is also probably positive into the blue decks, specifically Boa and Dofi. I think into Reiju it should also be slightly positive. I think his primary negative matchup is going to be NL. I think Kalgara should be slightly favored. I think Nami is definitely favored. I think Lucci is unfavored. So the primary 2 bad matchups for Zoro are going to be primary 3 bad matchups are going to be BY, NL, and I think Lucci as well. Everything else should be either 50-50 or slightly favored, or extremely favored in the case of Mako. Now, next up, let's go through the A tier bit by bit. So again, there's a lot of leaders here to talk about. Other than that, I'm also going to, of course, give an honorary mention to Vegapunk. I think Vegapunk has shown that he has a decent showing in 08 already, and he's topped several times at the respective Japanese CS. Let's go through the A tier of decks again. I think Kalgara is really good. The primary reason why he's still at A instead of S is I don't believe his matchup into the top 3 is that great. I think Pudding and Zoro may be slightly Pudding and BY Luffy may be slightly positive because of the fact that you can play the double Kalgara or Kalgara into Viper or just Kalgara into Nolan. But I think if you lose gas or you aren't able to hit the high roll for the Kalgara deck, you definitely lose a lot of gas and lose a lot of pressure on your opponents. And it's also not that consistent because while you do have a couple of searches for the Kalgara, it's still, you do still need to draw into those searches. But it's a very strong deck. I think the game plan is very easy to execute. While it does have that couple of searches, I wouldn't say it is absolutely the most consistent deck, but I think it's a very good choice for OP08. Next, of course, is Bonnie. Again, it has a good matchup into Luffy. I think it has a decent chance against Pudding if you're able to draw your 10 cost Luffys. And other than that, Zoro, I feel, is slightly unfavored, but it should be manageable. Just consistently high roll, not that hard, I agree, yeah. I think if you are named Hallucinates, you can probably do that, but otherwise, let me just recommend the leaders that are a bit more consistent. Okay, next is Reiju. I think Reiju is still very good in OP08. I think, like I mentioned, if you high roll, the deck is unstoppable. But at the same time, you're dealing with things like BY Luffy as well as Zoro at the top, which I think are going to be negative matchups for you. You may have difficulty dealing with both of these decks. And I think Pudding wise, you will be slightly favored only if you draw the HGG pair early, and that's another problem that you may have. Even then, right, even if you draw the HGG pair, once they drop 6 cost Katakuri, they'll have a 7k beta to match your EGG, and then they'll also be able to heal and continually regain resources, so it's very hard to match. Okay, next is Katakuri. I think Katakuri will have a decent time into Pudding and BY Luffy, but I think it will be really tough to beat Zoro with that deck. So right now, it's still going to be A. Nami should have a decent time into Luffy. And some of the slower decks here, specifically I think NL, of course, Bonnie, Lucci, they will have a not so great time into Nami. But again, I think not very good into Zoro, not very good into Pudding. So for now, we're going to put her here as well. Lucci here, again, auto loses to BY Luffy most of the time. You're not really allowed space to put tech in your deck to fight BY Luffy anymore as well because of Jack. But that may change with the stage being banned, who knows. So for now, I'm going to put it at A. I think it also loses to Pudding. As I was saying, I think Lucci has a negative matchup into both Pudding and BY Luffy, so for now I'm going to put it at OP08, at A for OP08. And then Dofi, Boa, and Mako, similarly, I think these 3 decks have a good matchup into BY Luffy, but I think all 3 will struggle into both Zoro and Pudding, so for now I'm also going to put it right here. Of course, I'm a Mako Coper. I think Mako is going to be pretty good into specifically the BY, and maybe against the Pudding you have a chance, but I will definitely need to solve the build before I can really make that claim confidently. Now, into the B tier, I think the most obvious choices are going to be Vegapunk, Moria, and Perona. These decks were mostly gate-capped by Lucci just being better at doing their job, Moria and Perona specifically. And I think other than that, Vegapunk was really good in the most recent set. I think it has a really good matchup into Dofi in particular, which is really popular in 8.5. But pre 8.5, I think it will be very similar to the BY Luffy versus NL matchup and the Pudding versus NL matchup. So at the moment, I feel like it's slightly favored into BY, but loses to both Zoro and Pudding. So that's why it's all the way down here. And for now, it just feels like slightly worse NL to me. So for now, I'm going to put it here. Similarly, Moria, I think, feels like a slightly worse Lucci. If you're playing the tempo version, it feels like a slightly worse Kalgara. So that's my current opinion for that. I think Perona remains a decent option. The main reason I don't love it that much is, again, I think Pudding and Zoro are going to put a lot of pressure on decks in 2 different ways. Of course, Zoro is going to put in aggro pressure by having a lot of bodies swinging into you, and Pudding is going to put on late game pressure by just consecutively dropping 10 cost bodies. So you have to be able to deal with either of these decks in order to play in OP08, I feel, at least the pre-ban meta. Okay, now I want to talk about post-ban. So post-ban, I want to talk about post-starter decks. So